Good morning, everybody. Happy day 4 of my Barry White impression. And welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor and backing singer, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Hello, Susie.
We will try to get through it. This is a People's pay-per-view, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to self-medicate with Strepsils like the rest of us. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the amazing story of how edited gene therapy has cured one little girl of a terrible disease, but the cost of it has consigned her sister to probably an early grave. This is the tale of Teddy Shaw, who's just 1 year old, and her sister Nala, who is 3. Both of them suffer from a horrible illness called metachromatic leukodystrophy, which destroys the protective covering of their nerve endings. Now, the condition affects only 5 children in the UK every year, but they inevitably die before they reach their teens, basically from the failure of brain and organs. And what's happened here, Jason, on the one hand, is that Teddy has been saved from all that. So let's do the good bit first. How have they managed to fix this?
I mean, first of all, Susie, can we call it MLD? Because I'm very impressed with your pronunciation, but I'm going to struggle.
Metachromatic leukodystrophy.
I mean, it's just kind of every parent's kind of worst nightmare, isn't it? It's like it's kind of judgment and solitary territory. You can save one child, but not another. And I kind of, as somebody who's kind of got 3 daughters, my kind of heart goes out to these parents, because this is just awful but fantastic at the same time. And I mean, what sort of emotions they're going through it's really difficult to comprehend, isn't it? It's so difficult. I mean, yes, they know they can save one life, and the other they can't, and that's just appalling.
It's the most mind-bending thing to have to try and consider whether you're a parent or not. So what's happened is metachromatic leukodystrophy.
Well done.
I can keep on saying it. Roughly, is a condition which they've managed to fix, but it's caused by a faulty gene. And so what they've done is they've taken some of Teddy's cells, which have this gene in. They've taken them out of her body. They have managed to fix that gene, and then they have put it back in again. And it's a very, very expensive and long-winded process. Now, the reason that her parents realised Teddy needed this treatment was that Nala, the older sister, was diagnosed first, because obviously there were signs and symptoms. That sparked these checks on her younger sibling, who wasn't showing so many symptoms. Now, the problem is that the treatment's so specialised, it costs about £2.8 million a go. So the NHS has decided it can only really be given to patients who have not yet suffered irreversible nerve damage. And Jason, it's that Nala, the older sister, just didn't meet those criteria, did she? Because she's had it for so much longer.
And in a kind of slightly weird sense that, you know, Nala has actually saved the life of her younger sister, because they recognized the symptoms. You know, she started kind of falling over. She kind of was showing signs of, you know, she wasn't acting normally, and because of that, they were able to diagnose it. But unfortunately, it's too late for her, but enough time to save Teddy. I mean, there is an interesting but quite sensitive argument about this is the most expensive treatment on the NHS, as you say. You know, it's coming close to £3 million, and there's a question. You know, lots of people watching this will be going, we can't get the drugs we need. And NICE, which is the organisation that's responsible for deciding whether medicines are cost effective and should be supplied by the NHS, has some very difficult decisions to make. My personal view is I think it's amazing the NHS can do this, and there is no price you can put on life. And you know, yes, it's expensive, but it saves a life, and that's what the NHS is there for. And it shouldn't be about cost, and it should be about, you know, can we serve everybody to the best of our ability? But I do see this argument behind there, and I do understand it.
Yeah. What do you think, everybody? Get into the comments and ask us your questions. Do you think that NICE has made the right decision here? A difficult, impossible decision almost, but that a treatment that can help fix someone's problems really has to be given at the right time before those problems get too bad and irreversible. At the moment, medically, we don't know if giving the same treatment to Nala would have the same impact. So that's why it's gone to one and not the other. And it is our money when it comes down to it. It's a lot to save one life. If you know Nala and Teddy, you probably don't think there's any price that you could put in it, and for your own children. But when it comes down to how you spend taxpayers' money, you've got to try and spend it in the most effective way. Of course, these problems are all resolved if we actually started living like Star Trek and got rid of money, because then it wouldn't matter how much anything costs to do. You would just fix someone on the basis that you knew how to fix them, if Bones McCoy was at it. But we're not in that situation. Now, like you said, Jason, it doesn't really bear thinking about quite how their parents, which is called Ali and Jake, they live in Northumberland, how they must be dealing with it all. Teddy's getting better, playing and growing like a normal little girl, but Nala is getting worse. It seems there's not much hope of recovery. But it's all not completely lost, because the NHS does say that if the manufacturers of this therapy can prove that it helps older children who are further along this path, and MLD cruelly does generally affect children, then it could be given to them too. But I suppose the question here is really whether gene editing like this can not just stop the damage like it has in Teddy's case, but whether it can actually reverse what's already happened, which is what Nala and children in her situation would need. So, I mean, Jason, it just makes you think really that, you know, it's amazing what science can do and what they've been able to figure out. And, you know, they can dive right into the end of your nerve and see what's happened to it, and then find a way to fix that all over your body in a trillion-celled organism. But every time they do something great like that, it just kind of shows the need that we need science to do even more, doesn't it? It's never enough.
I mean, well, as you say, there are positives from this story as well. You know, a life has been saved. It's an extraordinary kind of medical breakthrough. The brilliance of the people who are being able to diagnose and find a cure to this, you have to be full of admiration for them. And ultimately, you know, this is about the preciousness of life, and
Jason seems to
the more advances we can make in medical science, the better.
I think you went in and out there, Jason, but we
sorry,
basically
I can hear you quite clearly.
You making a very fundamental metaphysical point about the preciousness of life, and then he said,
but that's the end of today's poetry.
That's the end of today's. Yeah, we won't be clipping that one for social media, I'm afraid. Although it would have been, I'm sure, very, very profound. But thank you for that. It's kind of difficult, really, to have any more comments upon that story, apart from to offer everyone's sort of best sympathies to the family, and hope that there is some way that they can find that this treatment would also help Nala and extend, if not improve, drastically her life as well. But now we need to move on to another story in the paper, not least because it would mean I could stop speaking and Jason could take over a bit, which is that on page 2, and the alleged Whitehall bully, Dominic Raab, has sloped off from his never-ending scandal. They couldn't fit sloped off, obviously, in that headline. It had to be mountain pressure. But he's sloped off from these repeated allegations that keep being made in public and from which he can't really defend himself. So this is the scandal, Jason, that he's been accused of bullying. There's been 8 complaints made against him. There are apparently 24 different witnesses. It's being investigated by a KC. And he's still in post while this is all rumbling on. Apparently, he's trying to be nicer to some of his staff now. People have noticed that. But the allegations include claims that some of his staff at numerous departments over the years lost weight, even felt suicidal. Do we know when this is going to report back? How long can it carry on?
No, well, I mean, the lawyer Alex Too looking into this. It's slightly in kind of his gift in terms of how long it should take, but it's also very much in Rishi Sunak's gift. I mean, Rishi Sunak could say, I want this now, and therefore the person conducting the inquiry would do it as quickly as possible. I mean, we have to say at the top of all of this, Susie, just because the lawyers would want us to, Dominic Raab has denied all the allegations against him. Yeah. But bearing that in mind, I think we are allowed to say that these allegations have been around for some time. And there was a question mark about why, given these allegations were swirling around, that Sunak went ahead and appointed Robb to such a senior position. Because we know, and I know because I worked in Parliament for a long time, that the whips, who are the people in charge of party discipline, would have told Sunak, that these allegations exist. They may have said that they're not true. They may have said quite clearly, in the same way I'm sure Robb's lawyers want to say, that he denies all these allegations. But they would have been there, which raises this question mark over Sunak's. We've had it with Suella Braverman, who wrote the Ministerial Code, but was allowed back in a position. We had it with Nadeem Sahari. And now we've still got it here. Now, why does Sunak keep appointing these people?
Well, exactly. There does seem to be a bit of an issue with Sunak's judgment. If nothing else, the fact that once you do appoint someone, even if you're told there are allegations which are, groundless, and you're told there's nothing to them, as soon as you appoint that person to a high-profile job, those groundless allegations are going to come back out and cause a stink. And you can't. Sometimes when you're in power, you can't really refute them all in quite the way that you would want to, or deal with them. And it's only going to cause a fuss, and it distracts attention from whatever it is your government is trying to do. So it's unwise in political terms to appoint somebody who doesn't seem squeaky clean. But Dominic Raab has been a long-term ally of Rishi Sunak's. He was one of the first people to come out and support Rishi Sunak's bid for the leadership. And so he obviously felt he needed to pay him back in some way. Will he, if this report does find that Raab has done something wrong, is Sunak ever going to fire him? He really won't want to.
I mean, it would depend on the weight of evidence. I mean, Sunak's argument for to play devil's advocate is that everybody should be innocent and proved guilty. Let's say the report does come back and it's particularly damning. I think it would be very difficult to keep hold of him. And there were question marks of when Sunak did his mini reshuffle of last week of why he did it before this report had come out, because he's just going to have to do another reshuffle anyway. If the report comes back and it's particularly damning of Robb's kind of attitude and behaviour. But there is a kind of this kind of wider question of how, what is now acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of how you manage people. And I do think that maybe kind of Westminster in particular and is way behind the times of how kind of, what is acceptable in a modern office. And kind of, there's still this, they defend people who are kind of upset by aggressive forms of management as snowflakes. I kind of disagree with that. I think, times have moved on. There's no way in the you would treat staff in that sort of way anymore. People have changed, attitudes have changed, and it does strike me that this kind of like what was acceptable even 10 years ago is totally unacceptable now.
Yeah, these things are not all not quite as cut and dried, perhaps, as some of Dominic Raab's friends would have us know. I mean, what do you think, everybody? Have you had a bullying problem at work? Have you been accused of bullying? How did work handle it? Did they handle it the way Rishi Sunak's handling it? Or was something different done with it? Let us know. Do you think Robb should still be in his job? Do you think that he should be on gardening leave? Mike says, it seems difficult to see any outcome other than a very damaging report on Robb, and either Sunak will have to do a Boris and overrule the findings, or sack him. Both reflect badly on Sunak's judgment. Now, Mike's got a good point here, Jason, because as I understand it, the report is looking into whether or not Robb was aware he was a bully. So, did he do these things? A. B. Did he know that was the wrong thing to do? Or C. Was it inadvertent? Right, and that comes down to the intent of the person who's been accused. So that's why, as a KC doing it, and we're doing almost to a criminal level of liability. But let's just say it all comes out in Dominic Raab's favour. He did some of it, but not all of it, right? And he didn't realise that he was causing any concern. But that is still going to involve a report which lists Dominic Raab did A, B, and C. The civil servant who is at the end of that has probably got a fairly strong chance of coming out and speaking to a newspaper afterwards saying, Dominic Raab made me feel like X, Y, and Z. That is the best possible outcome, and that continues the scandal for a huge long period of time, doesn't it, Jason? That could still politically, even if in a normal office that is something that you would not be fired for, politically that actually changes the equation a bit, because it could just mean that his situation does become untenable because the scandal just keeps rolling.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, kind of, Sunak's kind of worst nightmare is his report isn't clear cut. I mean, he would kind of, if it completely exonerates him, Sunak can kind of breathe a sigh of relief. If it's completely damning, then you can, then Robb would obviously have to go. But if it's kind of in between, then that kind of leaves all sorts of difficult judgment calls for Sunak, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah, it doesn't really work out well in any event.
Yeah, and just by the way, why I'm not against MPs having holidays, and I think they need them. If I was Dominic Raab, and I would be much more worried about trying to save my seat than actually heading off to the slopes. I mean, there's a poll out this week showing that his seat in Esher is in real trouble from the Lib Dems. I think if he had a few days off, he might want to go and kind of knock on a few doors down there instead. But hey,
don't encourage them, Jason. I want my Michael Portillo moment. I'm looking forward to early 2025, and we get to see some of these faces trying to maintain a grimace of professionalism as they go down. Oh God, that was Barry White. That's done me now. We just had some breaking news, everybody, while we're on air, from our colleague Ben Glaze, who works in Parliament and is a regular guest on this show. Jeremy Corbyn is not going to stand for the Labour Party at the next general election. Keir Starmer has just told a press conference that he's giving right now into Labour's historic problems with anti-Semitism. They've just been told by I think it's the Equality and Human Rights Commission, that there is no longer a problem within the Labour Party with anti-Semitism, that Keir Starmer has fixed it. Yay. And he's giving a press conference about that. But he's revealed at that press conference that Jeremy Corbyn, the leader he replaced, the leader he served under in a shadow cabinet, and the former leader that he suspended from the Labour Party over allegations of anti-Semitism or not doing enough about it, is not going to be the Labour candidate in his constituency, which, Jason, is Islington North?
Islington North, yeah.
How do we feel about this? What is all this? What's the dark background to all of that?
Well, the from Starmer's point of view, the more he can distance himself from Corbyn, the better. He's slightly vulnerable to Tory attacks on the fact that, he, as you said, he served under Jeremy Corbyn. But the fact that he can say, I've moved the party on from that era, and I am now confident in myself and so in control of my own party that I can say that Corbyn will not stand, that is all in Starmer's favour. The downside is that Corbyn may stand as an independent in Islington, which could split the Labour vote. Now, the problem for Corbyn here is, although he is very popular in his seat, there is my experience and my looking at these things, MPs always overestimate their own personal vote, i.e. when people go to the polls, they vote for the MP, but they primarily vote for the party. And a good personal vote can be 2,000 or 3,000 extra. A really good one can be up to 5,000. It very rarely gets above that. Generally, people still vote for the parties. So Corbyn could stand. There's also rumours going around that Corbyn may even throw his hat in for the stand for the London mayor, the way Ken Livingstone did against Dobson under Blair. That could possibly prove problematic, though Sadiq's quite well embedded there if he decides to run for a third term. So, I mean, if I was Corbyn, I'd be weighing up how actually popular I am in my own seat.
But you're implying here, Jason, that lots of MPs are raging egotists and think only about themselves and their own popularity. So if he's weighing it up, he will be.
MPs, they like the affirmation, and but I'm afraid to say, and I want to let them down gently on this. They're not often nearly as personally popular as they like sometimes to imagine.
Yes, I think I've lost count of the number of showbiz people and also politicians who told me in the last few weeks they've got ADHD. Of course, you've got attention deficit, darling. That's why you do the job. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And of course, I'm sure that someone at some point might consider trying to buy off Jeremy Corbyn so that he doesn't stand and split the vote with the offer of something else. The chance to, like you say, go for the London mayoralty if Khan decides he wants to do something else. Maybe he can't do it as a Labour runner, of course, because Keir can't let him back in. There aren't many other parties that would that are sort of in Corbyn's ballpark, shall we say. He's not going to go and stand for the Lib Dems, is he? Kath Plummer there says we're waiting for Jeremy to start a socialist party. He could go and start his own party. That's been done before. They are very expensive, though, Kath, and I'm not sure that Jeremy Corbyn's got the kind of backers who have huge amounts of money. He did crowdfund a lot, of course, during his years as Labour leader and get lots of micro payments kind of through from Labour members. There are people who would support that, but they're kind of widely dispersed. And so the problem with Corbyn had, I think, when he was running for leader was that the people who felt the same way as him, there may be a big number of them, but they're spread through the constituencies. And so there was never enough to get one constituency, really, lots of constituencies over that barrier. So he got some of his friends elected, but then lost, of course, quite a few other seats. So it's interesting to see perhaps where Jeremy Corbyn ends up. I doubt he would accept a seat in the House of Lords, and I doubt anyone would offer him one. But he's probably not going to want to go into retirement on his allotment, is he, Jason?
I mean, it does. I mean, no. I mean, he did say the other day he's never going to retire. I mean, he'll always carry on doing politics in one form or another. I mean, it is extraordinary, but how far the party has moved since he was, leader just over 3 years ago. I mean, and how quickly these things can change. That we've gone from Corbyn, being the leader of the Labour Party to not even be able to stand at the next election. It's quite something.
Yeah.
I mean, for good or bad for the Labour Party. I mean, just pick up on Kath's point about starting a new political party. I mean, that's not the way the left of in Labour think. They've always long realised that the best way of having influence and getting any sort of change is to do it within Labour as part of a broad church rather than as a kind of separate entity, which would have marginal influence.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? And of course, it's also in the same 3 years, we've gone from a Labour leader who had huge number of, infighting and scandals and rows within his own party to a Labour leader who is strong enough to be able to just kick out the last leader.
This is what power does.
Yeah.
This is, when you're close to power.
On the other side of the House of Commons, you've gone from a leader who, in the Conservatives, who was strong enough to win a landslide, to a leader who can't even fire, people from his cabinet when they've been accused of wrongdoing and clean up his reputation. You had to wait days before he could find Nadeem Zahawi, who brought back in Suella Braverman, as you said, and now finds himself waiting months while the Dominic Raab scandal carries on and causes him a huge number of problems. The balance of power has definitely shifted in the House of Commons. Mike says the expulsion of Corbyn could cause a ruckus in the Labour Party. Some of the left will no doubt attack Starmer. Yeah, but he seems strong enough to withstand it, Mike, doesn't he? I doubt it's going to do anything to his election prospects with a wider country to be found to be less of a left-wing loon than Corbyn was, as far as
the more Starmer can define himself against the left of a party, the happier he is.
Yeah,
I mean, Blair used to do the same thing. In those days, was people like Eric Heffer on the left of the party who saw themselves as a thorn in Blair's side, but actually Blair kind of welcomed it because he kept on saying, "Look, I'm not Eric Heffer," and for Starmer, that definition is very valuable. What could prove problematic for Starmer is if he wins with a narrow majority at the next election, or he wins with it's a minority. And he has to form, he doesn't get an overall majority and has to form a kind of government with a coalition. In that point, then the left, and there's still enough of them in the party, there's 30 MPs in that kind of Corbyn camp, then they'd have quite a lot of leverage because every vote comes along, they can go, well, look.
Yeah, we're not going to do it unless you do X. I think that's where we need to, before we move on to some good news and letting my throat go. Bill says there's nothing socialist left in Starmer's Labour Party. I'm just about to address this point, Bill. A lot of people who were pro-Corbyn and pro-socialism and some of the more radical policies that Corbyn had would say that Starmer is going to not do any of that. And by throwing Corbyn out and moving further away from that, as Jason has just said, that they are betraying those ideals and are going to be, kind of a soft Tory kind of government. I would suggest, all right, that considering history and considering Starmer's need to get elected before he can do anything, and considering also some of the stuff that he has signed up to and spoken about in the past, I would suggest that you give the guy the benefit of the doubt for a bit, because I think he could well do some fairly radical things once he's in, but it's an issue of getting in first. And you're not going to get in if you are holding hands with Jeremy Corbyn. You are going to get in if you say, Jeremy Corbyn has gone, that era is over, look at me, I'm all professional, and I'm wearing a suit and tie, and I'm not on my allotment. Right? That's how you get elected. Once he's elected, then that's the time to worry about whether or not he is doing all the things that you would want a Labour Prime Minister to do. And I hope there's a national care service. I hope there's proper recognition for the nuclear test veterans. I hope there's a few other things. Someone did mention to me the other day that he's more of a Clement Attlee, a bit quieter, a bit more boring maybe, but actually quite radical. So we'll have to wait and see, because I think Britain might be ready for some of that stuff now. We'll have to find out, won't we? But first off, we have found, to wind up on what started as a fairly depressing, I suppose, edition of the news agenda, we have found some good news for you in the world, and here it is. Meet Norman, everybody, or Norman's bum, I should say. He is a 20-year-old Syrian brown bear who was so desperate to get out of a 12-foot by 12-foot cage that he'd been kept in by an Armenian oligarch that he tried chewing his way through the bars. Inevitably, he has wrecked his teeth because Norman's not too bright. He should have used a key. But after he was rescued by a wildlife charity, he went under sedation here, as you can see, by a British vet to fix his busted gnashers. And it all went very well. And I suppose, Jason, it's definitely a sign that bears shouldn't be in cages. But is it proof, do you think, that that's probably where a lot of oligarchs should be?
Yeah, we definitely should put oligarchs in cages and anybody else who could mistreats.
Yeah, let them gnaw their way out and see how it affects
like that. I'm really impressed by this dentist. He normally does human teeth only in Chichester, and yet he flies out to do kind of emergency ops and for wild animals around the world. He doesn't just do bears. He's done all sorts of creatures.
There were kinds of wild animals, bears and monkeys and slow lorises and goodness knows what else. And obviously there's something about the dental patients in Chichester which is giving him the right kind of practice. I'm not going to make any comment about the hair.
I'm not particularly up on orthodonty, but are bears' teeth similar to human teeth in terms of, do we kind of, is it just the same process?
They're omnivores. So maybe they eat meat and veg, don't they?
So like another patient but with slightly worse halitosis. Is that how it is? I don't know.
Well, I don't know what their flossing's like, but I imagine it's not quite the same as us. But they do have molars to grind veg, and they have the sharp ones at the front for teeth, for meat, and so on. So they're probably not a world away. Although, like I say, you probably don't see scenes like that in Chichester.
I'm very glad it was done under an anaesthetic, because you really wanted to do that when the bear's up and wide awake.
Not when the bear's up and around. It'd be quite difficult.
No.
Speaking as someone who ought to brush her dog's teeth this afternoon and is putting it off because he just chews the toothbrush. There's not. I don't want to be
always a joy.
Yeah, in the bone. That's what I say. Right. Yeah. Thank you for taking us through all this, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for putting up with my throat. Hopefully by next Monday, in another edition of the News Agenda, I will be speaking normally again, and I will no longer be sounding like a 1970s sex god. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Thank you for your comments. If you're listening to us on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. And until next Monday, tatty bye, everybody.